You're listening to 99.1 WQRT LP, and welcome to Radio Free Book Club for May 2023. I'm Ken Honeywell. I'm a writer and reader from Indianapolis, and today we're talking about a novel that the author has described as a literary feminist boarding school murder mystery. It's Rebecca Makkai's I Have Some Questions for You. It is set in a remote New Hampshire boarding school. It does involve a murder mystery, and we can debate the feminist claim if we want to. It does have a literary pedigree. Makkai's previous novel, 2018's The Great Believers, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. So this was a pretty hotly anticipated novel and widely reviewed and pretty widely well-reviewed, and I at least have been hotly anticipating our discussion about it. And to that end, we've collected an all-star lineup of book clubbers, including one new member, and I'd love for everyone to introduce themselves. Let's go around the table. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Mattingly. I'm a reader and writer from Indianapolis, living now in Fillmore, Indiana.
And I'm Jen Bingham, also a reader and writer from Indianapolis. I live in Bates-Hendricks, so right around the corner from where we're recording.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. First time appearance.
Yes,
Great to have you.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
Yay,
we're excited you're here.
Welcome, Jen. Traci Cumbay here, baker, hiker, and I'm really trying to learn how to do handstands.
All right, how's that going?
It's scary. Have you done a handstand?
Well, not for many a moon.
Yeah. It's a little intimidating. I'm getting closer.
Yeah, I can't do one.
Will you then try to walk on your hands or anything
Absolutely.
like that?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right. We will look forward to that. Well, before we get started, I also want to I know we do usually at the end of the show, but I just want to also give a shout out to our producer, Oreo Jones, who does a great job with the show and who has a big show coming up, his event called Treese. It's a big hip hop festival around the Fountain Square neighborhood of Indianapolis, and it is August 26th. So if you are a hip hop fan, get your tickets now because it's going to be big. Yeah, it's back after a couple of years from COVID, and it will be bigger and better than ever. So,
oh my gosh, can't wait.
Yeah, so please come out. All right, so and before we get started, as usual, we are definitely going to spoil this.
Okay.
So if you're planning to read, I have some questions for you, and you want to keep the mystery a mystery. You want to come back and listen at a later time, which you can definitely do. You can always find this and all the episodes of Radio Free Book Club on Mixcloud, Spotify, Apple, just about anywhere you stream podcasts. And we do hope you'll come back and listen. I have a feeling we're going to have some strong opinions about this one, and okay. Let's get going. So first of all, Rebecca Makkai. Anyone familiar with Rebecca Makkai? Any previous experience with her work?
I read The Borrower about 10 years ago, but I don't remember it very well. I remember liking it, so I was looking forward to reading this one. But beyond that, I don't think I've read anything else by her.
Yeah. Anybody else?
No, I was coming in cold.
Yeah. I read The Great Believers, and The Great Believers, I think, earned the praise it got. It was really good. It was set in a couple of different time periods, but the main one was in the 80s, kind of at the height of AIDS in Chicago. And it was really a really good, literary, moving literary novel. It was also one of the Times' 10 best books of the year in 2018. Really, really good, I thought. So, yeah, I had really high hopes for this book. I was looking for a pretty literary novel.
Right.
Anyone want to give a quick summary of the book? Anyone got 100 words of this is what the book was? Sure.
So it's about a podcaster and film professor who goes back to her old. She's about middle age now and goes back to the boarding school that she attended, a high school, to teach a couple-week podcasting course. And one of her students, with a little encouragement from her, dives into a murder that happened while she was a student there.
Yeah, I think that's a very fine setup. And of course, a lot else happens too. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that the kind of where it starts is with just kind of a list of bits of like lurid details of crimes, all of them, or seemingly all of them, involving young, pretty, white, wealthy women. And what the author has said is that she wanted to actually take one of those cases and really explore it. That was kind of what she was trying to do. Anybody have any thoughts about how well she did that?
Yeah, I think she did a pretty good job. I really liked this book. I may be the only one who did from what people are saying, but I love true crime and I love murder mysteries, so it was my sweet spot.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the lists of crimes because they're so common. This type of true crime is also about women being injured by men. So I felt like that was a theme throughout the book.
For sure.
It is an important thing to talk about. The white woman syndrome, where people care about a blonde girl who goes missing more than somebody else, is definitely problematic. And she kind of brought that in. I don't know how successful she was at dealing with some of that stuff, but she did a good job of dealing with wrongful convictions, I thought, and how hopeless that is for the person who's in prison and how bleak prison is. The scenes where she talked about Omar's experiences with getting stabbed and then getting an infection and the way he was treated and not allowed to heal, really. I thought those were good. I really liked those parts of the book.
Yeah, it's interesting that specifically Makkai said that specifically was a detail she got from talking to a defense attorney.
Yeah.
That was like a real situation, that he would get up and have breakfast. He wouldn't be allowed to have lunch. He'd get back to prison too late to have dinner.
That was crazy to me, too.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me that it's real.
Yeah. So this novel is set in this kind of remote New Hampshire boarding school. Traci, I know that you had just read The Secret History, which is not a boarding school novel. It's a college novel, but it's got that same kind of boarding school atmosphere, that's such a kind of a romantic setting for fiction. And I think of like Dead Poet Society, Separate Peace, Skippy Dies, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, anything Harry Potter is boarding school, right? Mm-hmm. So why is this setting just like, I find it really seductive. Do you guys think? Alex, what do you think?
I do in the abstract. I actually ironically read The Secret History for the first time in like the last 6 months as well. So it was definitely,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was very fresh in my mind. But I mean, Harry Potter, Gilmore Girls, there's all these like examples from pop fiction and literature of like really good examples of the boarding school setting. I felt like this didn't quite pull it off. I just didn't think Granby was that interesting. And the fact that we're spending so much time there, both in the present and in the past, really makes it a struggle because I mean, it was kind of pitched as this, they kind of argued whether it was elite or not, but this boarding school that was like a world away from her youth in southern Indiana. But none of the experiences that she had there were any different from anything I experienced. Combine my high school experience with like freshman year at Ball State, where I was in a dorm for the first time. And that was pretty much Granby. I mean, it was a pretty much like kind of bland, average Midwestern. So it didn't get to like The Secret History, where you're almost like living amidst this weird cult of like really interesting people, or like Hogwarts, where it's just this bizarre world that you've got to kind of learn the rules, or even something. I kept thinking of Gilmore Girls because it's it's like a funny version of it, but it kind of presents interesting characters who are so weird at times that you're kind of pulled in. But none of these characters were like especially weird. There were times when they kind of blurred in my mind because they weren't quite as distinct as I wanted them to be. Are
you talking about the student characters?
Yeah,
at Granby?
The students that in the past, like Robbie and Carlotta, and kind of all, for the most part, some of them, I think Dorian Cullors, who was kind of this awful, horrible person, like he probably stood out the most just because of his awfulness. But most of the other characters just seemed like kind of average kids in an average high school. And maybe that was part of the point, but at the same time, as a novel, I guess I don't know. I just didn't find Granby quite like sparking the way the kind of dark academia of like A Secret History did. And I guess I wanted something more than what we got.
Yeah, I really liked the book, but I do agree with that. And the characters, the students, the present day students were really thin. And in some ways, the one who ended up investigating the murder on her podcast, I think you kind of alluded to this, Tracy. It seemed like the narrator was controlling her and she was just a plot device more than anything. So I liked this more on the level of a genre book and didn't really find... I liked Granby and I thought the main character was interesting. Yeah. But it wasn't The Secret History for sure.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I guess we haven't all gone around rating it, but I think I'm probably in between Tracy and Jen. Like there were things I didn't like, but there were other things that I did like, and I did like spending time with the main character, and I thought because she was complicated and at times things were very messy, I enjoyed that part of it. So I don't know, maybe Granby doesn't need to be that interesting because it's mostly kind of interior, this narrator. So maybe, other characters would have pulled us away from what the book was really about. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Tracy, I think it's your turn to weigh in. Everyone seems to be thinking that you're going to come down on the other side of this for some reason.
I may have spoiled it a little bit.
Well, it's funny somehow that I think that the phrase "it was well written" has become some kind of a backhanded compliment. But please, how well written did you find this?
Not very.
Yeah.
I read a review after the fact that said something about couldn't put it down. I couldn't make myself pick it up most of the time. It took me an extraordinary amount of time to read this not very long book. I guess to get back to your question, I don't find anything particularly appealing about the boarding school setting. I'm not drawn to that on its own, but I do also agree that a lot of these characters were just plot devices. A lot of these characters were just archetypes. And I struggled. I didn't particularly relate to or care about the woman who is narrating it. Nothing in it was working for me is the short answer. I won't go on and on. Nothing in it was working for me.
Yeah. But, well, thanks for persevering. Mm-hmm. Thanks for
You're really trying my patience, Ken.
That's why I'm letting you pick the book in a couple of I find it a very seductive environment. The boarding school is such a closed society, and so much of it seemingly run by the inmates. When you focus on the kids, I think it's really interesting. And I kind of agree with Alex. I didn't think the characters were there were a lot of characters, and I'm not sure they were very sharply drawn. I didn't think about them too much, I don't think. But yeah, I didn't think about them a lot as possible suspects, for example.
Right.
If you were going to line up a whole bunch of possible suspects, there weren't a whole lot of suspects, even though she kind of pretended there were by having those little interstitial chapters. Yeah.
I skipped those most times.
Yeah.
That's funny. The only chapter I got interested in actually was the Omar chapter, where it was his experience and him talking about the trial.
Yeah.
That was compelling.
I didn't read any of them after the first one. I just skipped them.
How funny. Okay.
What else, Jen? You seem like you liked this book. I will say I like the book too. I didn't. There are things I didn't like about it, but what worked for you in the book?
Well, Tracy had texted me about my opinion about it because when she said, I don't can't remember the exact thing, but she's like, what did you like about it? And I was like, well, I like true crime, murder mysteries, boarding schools, goth kids, successful people coming back to the place where they're from, dead inside narrators. So it was just everything that I wanted in a book, really. And I can see that it wasn't the most literary book, but I loved that. Bodhi, I didn't like as much the second time I read it, but some of it was just her being souped up, I think.
Yeah.
Like, she's very manipulative and pretended like she wasn't. So that was interesting to me, although there's also an aspect of that that's a plot device. Yeah, and I also noticed on my second reading that whenever people said, what do we call it now, politically correct things, she would kind of dismiss it in her mind, but then say the right thing, like, let's talk this out. But, like, she didn't really seem to believe what she would say aloud to people, which I also found very interesting. So that character was interesting, if unlikable. I also liked that she had lived in Indiana and had a bad childhood. So I was like, yes, that's me. Although mine was not that bad. So I just liked a lot of things about it. The murder mystery was fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of those same things appealed to me about it. That list you rattled off there, I think those are all like appealing kind of story elements to me. That'll get me interested. Mm-hmm. What did you think about the choice to write this to someone?
Oh my gosh, I was just going to bring that up. That really stood out to me because, first you have this sense of confusion. Who is this you in the first place? So it's written to this you the whole time, who turns out to be one of the teachers who is a suspect. And I kept wondering the whole time, actually, I don't understand why it's written to this person. So I can't wait to hear what you guys are going to say about that.
As a plot device, I thought it was great because I had the same reaction. Like, I want to know who this guy is, and like, is he the killer, or is that too obvious that she would be writing to the killer? It definitely kind of piqued and pulled my interest out. But at the same time, should this have been written as like letters or emails instead of a structured, chaptered novel? I don't know. Like, there were definitely points where I was like, she seems to be taking a very long time to tell this guy, like, because it is like, I think all of it really is directly narrated to a specific person.
Yes.
And so by the end, it does kind of, I don't know, it's hard to suspend your disbelief through the whole novel, but.
And why? Why would she be talking to him? They weren't especially close. She was in his theater group.
No, they were close. They were closer than that. He was her mentor.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of felt like there was some implication that, like, if Thalia wasn't there, then it might have been Bodhi who got, like, pulled into his, like, predation. Like, because she, at one point he was like, oh, this is my gal Friday. I wish I could clone her. And she's, like, leaving him the cans of RC Cola as, like, their little inside joke. Like, there's definitely some, like, weird, like, boundary blurring stuff happening. And, obviously he was, off being awful with Thalia, but she's kind of, I feel like she's got like some very complicated emotions around like being angry and jealous, but also like angry at him for being inappropriate with students. And so I felt like I kind of understood why she was addressing him specifically. Like Omar's been wrongly named, so she's working to kind of try to clear his name, but really a lot of what's going on for her, I feel like, is still tied to that relationship for her versus with Thalia or with Omar or with anybody else at the school. So I felt like I kind of understood why it was, even though I don't know if it totally paid off by the time it was all said and done.
Yeah, I thought they were really close, especially because her life was so bleak. She didn't really have anybody, and he was like the only adult that paid attention to her. So it was like she loved him, I think, and in a parental kind of way. I enjoyed the addresses to
Denny
Block, but also when I read it the second time, I was really noticing those transitions between the address and then the regular text of the book, and it doesn't really make sense when you get down at that level because she's explaining things that he would know. because she has to explain it to the
Right.
reader.
Okay.
Because they're not going to know anything about this school. I mean, she does some good things with talking to the taxi driver. That does a lot of exposition stuff, or not talking to him. But yeah, it didn't fully work for me either. But it was intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as something to suck you into the plot. Just as a writer's decision, I think it's a very interesting decision. I mean, certainly there's a point in the book where she believes that he was the killer, and I think that. And she certainly believes Omar wasn't the killer, and now this guy becomes kind of the most likely suspect in her mind for a good chunk of the book. So I think that's an interesting way to manipulate the reader, frankly, to think about very differently about that teacher and his relationship.
Yeah, that is.
So, when you two are talking about this, it sounds so much more interesting, because if you're writing a novel about a woman dealing with the fact that this person who was a mentor to her, she also suspects of being a murderer, that's a hell of a thing to grapple with. But I didn't feel like that really bubbled up in this novel.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, the stuff I was throwing out, like the RC Cola, is pretty minor detail. Like, she never goes in any great depth about like that mentorship, like in The Secret History, where you have that kind of professorial figure who is clearly like just messing up like his kids' brains. he's deliberately, yeah. And not that Denny Black doesn't do that as well, but I guess she doesn't go into the depth about some of that. So I'm reading into things, but she doesn't actually say a lot of that. Like, it could certainly be, if that was the intention, I think that could definitely have been brought out. I mean, I may be just projecting, because I'm looking for a reason, right? Like, I'm looking for why is she writing to this guy? Well, it must be all this stuff, but that may not actually be in the book.
Yeah, I don't know. I say I also agree with Jen that. But I think there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't appear like it would be written to Denny Block. It would just be written to a more general audience. But that didn't bother me. I mean, I thought of that, but it just kind of disappeared for me. And then when he came back in, it kind of all just made sense. An interesting choice, anyway. Mm-hmm. Maybe. Tracy, come on now. So Tracy, what did you think of Bodhi as a character? She had a very complicated backstory. There was a lot back there, like her brother killed her father, then her brother killed himself, then her mom went off and joined the Mormons and left her with a couple who took her to a ritzy boarding. I mean, it's a bunch of crazy. And she also had, some kind of inappropriate attack on her in college. Did she say she was raped, or she was certainly molested in some way in college, right? So she's got a very crazy backstory.
And I think she has to be the narrator, because she has to be the person who was on the fringes of what was happening in the high school. And she definitely felt like an outsider that whole time. For, I think, a lot of that had to do with the reasons that you mentioned. She'd had such trauma right before she came to high school, and then did not fare well in high school. As a character, as an adult, she's very tedious. She drinks too much and overly involved in these little dramas. And I really don't know what to say beyond that. I didn't find her particularly engaging.
Yeah.
And she's a little frustrating. I wanted her to behave better. I didn't want her to be lashing out on Twitter and hitting like on racist memes.
Yeah. That was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Drunken tweeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a thing. And Jen, you had a different experience with Bodhi. You like Bodhi.
I didn't like Bodhi that much. I just thought she was very interesting.
Oh, okay.
As a teen, I did like her. I agree with Tracy on the adult Bodhi. She was a little tiresome, but interesting to me. I mean, she despite having been in therapy, she obviously had not really taken that to heart. So the result was an unreliable narrator, I would say.
Yeah.
An interesting one to me. And again, I could tell that her podcast was based on does anybody know that podcast? Because I can't remember the name. There's
Starlet Fever?
Oh,
Starlet Fever, that's
Yes.
it, yes.
I can't remember the real name.
I don't know
the name of the real podcast it's based on.
Oh,
No, I have no idea. But I liked the name Starlet Fever. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's a really good podcast. I wish I could remember the name, but I will text it to you guys later.
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, sometimes Bodhi was tough to read about, and sometimes it was, very aggravating to see the decision she was making. But I think one thing I did like about the book was that it would have been easy in some ways, I think, to have made the character very like kind of clean cut and kind of a crusader, kind of on the right side of the issues that this novel discusses. And instead, she's much messier than that, and she does and says the wrong things. And like Jen says, like sometimes you feel like she's just like parroting what she thinks is like appropriate, but she doesn't really think that way. But she's still trying to do kind of the right thing, even as she's immersed in this like toxic sludge of social media and news and.
That was relatable.
Yeah. I mean, one of the effects, like at the beginning of this episode, Ken, you were talking about where she's kind of giving this litany of crimes against women, and that appears throughout the book, like there chapter after chapter after chapter as this repetition. And I think that does a really effective job of just showing like what it feels like sometimes to be in this world where the algorithm, if you get like pulled into a story about tragedy, the algorithm is happy to just feed you story after story after story until it just becomes inescapable. And that there's a quote I'll pull out later, but that just feels like that is the sea that she is swimming in and sometimes drowning in. So I liked that she was really messy, even though I also feel like this novel could have been 150 pages shorter, maybe. So spending less time.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If it was a little bit shorter, I think she would have felt a little less tedious. Being as big and long as this novel was, there were times when I was like, okay, she's screwing up her life again. But I mean, I get who this character is. But,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So, Jen, what is the appeal of true crime? You're a true crime fan. Why do you love it?
I think part of it is that it tells a complete story, which is gross. There's somebody who's right and someone who's wrong. As I gotten more into true crime, it's made me examine the justice system in general and realize how up everything is.
Yeah.
Like truly disgusting. I listened to a podcast from defense attorneys recently, and that was mind-blowing because everybody hates defense attorneys, but they're kind of like the presumption of innocence is what our culture is based on, and yet people want to throw people in jail without bail and all this other stuff. I don't know. I'm not very eloquent about it for some reason.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I don't think it's a really easy question. I'm a little interested in it from time to time, but I don't listen to it very often.
I have spent a lot of time thinking about why I like it so much. I do like abnormal I'm really interested in abnormal psychology as well.
Yeah.
So just a combination of weird things.
What did you all think about the relationship between Bodhi's husband, Jerome, and the, I guess, performance artist, Jasmine Wilde? What did we think about? Obviously, that was at least an interesting sidebar to the story that certainly affected Bodhi's frame of mind and caused that drunken tweet storm. What do we think about what happened there? Is that Me Too gone too far? She certainly thought it was.
I think I agree. It was a very mild instance of somebody really just having kind of a bad relationship as an adult with another adult. And at one point, someone was pointing out that the woman in question actually held the power over her husband. So it wasn't an example of him abusing his power to get something from her. it wasn't, I did not feel like it was a solid example of a man doing wrong. I was with Bodhi on that one.
Yeah, it seemed maybe a little bit gross, but not crime. I mean, I got both. I didn't think that this was something that was criminal or even particularly dastardly, but I do understand a young woman being really by a relationship and then going on and on about it for years, because I've been that woman, and she just happened to catch fire on Twitter and in performance spaces. So it just seemed like a kind of a bad interaction.
It did, and you know what irked me about it is that it came right in the middle of the book where, you know, that's where the turning point's supposed to be. And I thought, aha, maybe now things are going to really pick up. And then we find out what the incident is. And it's like, I'm maybe slightly uncomfortable with that, but I'm not upset about it.
Yeah.
And then the only thing that really comes of it is that Bodhi does some drunk tweeting and her husband quits his job. I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah. Well, and yet there were also all of these like microaggressions that added up in other parts of the book that seemed like maybe as one-offs, not as gross, but over time, like the guy, what was the guy's name who taunted her on campus?
Dorian Kohlers.
Right. I mean, that seemed a lot grosser than what Jerome did.
True. And even what one of the other girls did was grosser. What was the thing with the... I'm sorry.
Where
it was something about...
Yeah, that
right.
was really bad.
Yeah.
Really terrible. And the other thing is, it was the 90s, so that was just part of the culture. People were just like making jokes and right and left, so it wouldn't have been taken seriously at the time at all, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, obviously the times have changed, and I think the times have changed for the better. But there's also that question about, you know, when the standard answer is believe women, you know, is that, you know, what does that do?
Well, you also have to confirm that it's true. You can't just believe people wholesale, unfortunately. That was one of the things I got from that defense attorney podcast I listened to, is that you have to have proof, unfortunately, and these things are really difficult. Yeah.
So one of the themes of the book, to me anyway, was that how quick we are to judge people, just for better and for worse, and, you know, with only the most superficial exposure to who they are. And so, like Beth, who started the whole later thing, and really put a mark on Bodhi for her whole time at that school, had a horrible experience there. I mean, she appeared to be with it, but she was sexually abused. I mean, she was terrorized when she was there as well. So, you know, I don't think that necessarily excuses her bad behavior, but I mean, a lot of it is about all of these very superficial judgments we've made, especially with Omar.
One of the things I really struggled with this book at the end, because that did seem like such a persistent theme, like all the characters throughout the book, there's these judgments happening, and there's this complicity, you know, both online and in the real world, where everyone's kind of, like the students kind of all coordinating their story, each one with a little piece, but kind of knowing it's all going to end up pointing to Omar. There's this feeling like, well, those kids are all kind of guilty for getting Omar landed in prison. And then at the end of the book, she's rushing off, convinced that Robbie is the murderer, based on like a theory about him riding a bike and maybe there being some mud on his sweater. And I'm not saying I didn't end the novel like fairly convinced, like, yeah, okay, that makes sense that Robbie probably did it. But it wasn't like such a smoking gun. I don't know. I felt conflicted because I felt like I was supposed to, as a piece of like mystery fiction, come away feeling like, okay, case closed. We know Robbie did it. You know, maybe justice won't be carried out, but at least we know who it is. But so much of the book was centered on this theme of like, you need proof and we have to be sure. And it's not enough to just keep accusing like random people until one of them confesses, and there was never that scene. Like, I really felt like there's one scene where she has this guy, Mike Stiles, who is one of the kids, kind of alone in a hotel room, and she's kind of trying to tease information out of him. And in like a Perry Mason episode, I feel like that's where the guy would like break down and confess to murder and then try to kill her, and then the cop would bust in and stop. Like,
Right.
It was such part of a trope, but instead it just kind of fizzles. I was like, okay, we're not going to get that. But she doesn't, she also does not, Bodhi does not internalize the lesson of, we can't point the finger unless we definitively know, because that's how terrible things happen to other people. Mm-hmm. Instead, she like feeds a YouTuber like, it was Denny Black, he must have done it, put his name out there. And then it turns out it wasn't Mr. Black. So then the novel ends with, well, it must have been Robbie. We know Robbie's the murderer. But again, we don't know any of this from the novel's perspective. We really don't definitively know. And I don't know if that was a choice by the author necessarily to say, this is just this character, she's going to keep making this mistake over and over again, or if we're supposed to walk away feeling like the case was closed, even though it kind of contradicts the theme of the book. I couldn't quite decide which way, I thought.
Yeah, that's very interesting thought, Alex. And Jen, I also think that I haven't heard anyone else suggest that this was an unreliable narrator, but I think she was, in a lot of ways, an unreliable narrator.
She had so much unresolved trauma, in addition to the stuff that you were talking about, the toxic sludge of our present day. I felt like that was inside of her. Like, she was filled with toxic sludge that made her make bad decisions. And the Denny Block thing where she gave that tip to the YouTuber, I was so uncomfortable with that. And I thought he was going to have recorded it and play. That would have been really interesting to me if he had actually recorded that interaction and kind of blown her open even more.
Right.
But I definitely came away thinking Robbie did it, but your point is well made. That's interesting.
Well, and he wasn't convicted.
There was no DNA anywhere of him.
Right. I mean, we just had hearsay evidence. We had no real evidence of him being involved in the crime other than a little bit of timing that showed he possibly could have been involved.
Right.
So, yeah. So, did anybody, well, first of all, did anyone think Denny Block did it? And second, did anyone think he was culpable in some way? Do you think he knew that it wasn't Omar? I'm not sure the other kids knew that it wasn't Omar, but did he know that it wasn't Omar? There was certainly that implication.
Wasn't there even a little bit of hint that he and Robbie worked together on it? Did that come up somewhere?
I think, yeah, like in one of those chapters where she kind of theorizes, like I think in the Robbie chapter, she talks about like maybe him and Denny like exchanging a glance in the cafeteria where it's both like, okay, we both need to kind of keep our mouths shut. I thought that was pretty plausible. I mean, even though that chapter was kind of speculation, it seemed like it was very easy to imagine somebody like Mr. Black saying, okay, well, they've arrested somebody, so I'm not going to say a word. I'm just going to move to Bulgaria, which is where he ended up going next. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if he could have exonerated Omar or come forward with evidence that would have proven him innocent on that particular night, but I feel like he certainly didn't do anything to come forward and offer additional context.
No, because she was underage, right? So it was a crime. So he wanted to flee the scene of his own crime. I think it was more about covering up after himself than anything else.
Yeah. So like very early in the story, when the girl, Britt, decides she wants to do a podcast, she is initially very hesitant to do it because she doesn't want to be the white savior girl who does the podcast to spring the guy from jail. And then we just drop that.
Yeah.
I mean, that really is something that seemed like it was going to be part of the story, and it really wasn't. Am I misreading that, or did anybody feel like that was an ongoing part of the story?
It came up again when Britt wanted to quit podcasting because one of the other students said something about that to her. But that was it definitely wasn't an ongoing theme.
Yeah. I don't think it did either. Are there any other? What did we think of the other characters? Any other characters we especially liked or didn't like?
I liked her friend. Was it Fran?
Oh, Fran.
Fran was awesome.
Yeah, I like Fran. Did anyone ever think for a minute that Fran might have done it?
I did read a review that like strongly implied Fran was somehow involved in like trying to protect the school. I was like, I didn't get that at all. So I feel like, I don't know, maybe if I read it again for that, there would be something more, but I definitely didn't get on first read.
I would say she was protective of the school.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was inappropriately, but she was protective enough that I thought for a minute, maybe Fran. Yeah. That didn't come up though.
So you said at the beginning that somebody called this a feminist novel.
Yeah, the author.
Really?
Yes.
I was surprised by that description.
I heard her say it on 3 different podcasts.
Okay. Did she say more about that?
No, not really. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's obviously a Me Too era novel. She wrote it after The Great Believers, which was 2018. So it was kind of like the early height of Me Too.
And yet the only Me Too character in here is pretty questionable.
I don't know. I mean, I think in retrospect, obviously Denny Block was going to get his comeuppance, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think she tried to play the spectrum with different types of, like having her husband be a sort of quasi-creep. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know about feminist, though. I would say more of a pop culture feminist. I don't know feminism well enough to critique it at that level, but I don't think she does either.
Yeah, well, she's no Betty Friedan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the ending, and maybe no one's mentioned Carlotta, because I don't think there was much reason to mention Carlotta other than we were dumping her ashes in the tiger whip at the end of the book. Anybody have any thoughts about the ending? Did it wrap up in a satisfying way for you, Jen?
It wrapped up in a satisfying way as far as the imagery, but Carlotta was kind of a blah. She was just kind of a secondhand character to a series of other not terribly interesting characters. But
she seemed like a pretty vibrant young lady.
She did, but she wasn't ever in the book, really.
No,
I guess
she really
was as a kid. I don't know. Yeah, it was. I was happy with the ending, but I wasn't really excited about Carlotta.
I was happy it ended.
Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Jen. I felt like, I don't know, she wasn't super in the novel in such like a profound way that it felt like it was an especially moving ending. And I guess I didn't, until the end where they said, kind of implied that she really loved Granby. It seemed like she had a pretty awful time at Granby. So it didn't really feel completely true like that. I don't know that she would want her ashes spread there. It's always possible I've missed something, but she was also like assaulted by Dorian and his lackeys while on the Granby campus, among other things.
Right.
So it just, I don't know. It just seemed like an odd choice to say she loved this place so much, and now we're spreading her ashes here. I don't know. It came out of left field, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it.
Well, it was only 1/8 of her ashes.
Well, yeah, true.
So she probably had some reservations. Okay, well, let's talk about. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I'm sorry. So I would say that there is a parallel there between like that and then Bodhi like leaving these tokens around campus and going back to look for them to see if they're still there as like proof that she was there. And then Bodhi's benefactor, who is the kind of Mormon patriarch who adopted her and sent her to Granby at one point, goes to like a door frame or something and finds like where he's carved in his initials. So there does seem to be like, even among people with mixed feelings, this sense of still needing to prove that you were there and had the experiences you had. So, maybe that was part of, Carlotta's desire to have her ashes spread there. But
yeah. Sucks for Omar.
Well,
he can carve his initials on the prison wall, but
yeah, I mean, it if that was the intention, it doesn't feel like it pays off that way. Like I can maybe see the parallels, but again, it doesn't feel like that big kind of satisfying ending or sense of closure to something.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Alex, would you recommend the book to other readers?
I feel like every time I've been on the show, I say yes. Because I think after I have read a full novel, I have some feeling of affection for it. But I'm gonna say probably not. I mean, I didn't find it very satisfying as a mystery novel, and just as a piece of fiction, I just felt like it was maybe longer than it needed. I don't know. There was too much about it that I guess wasn't working. There were things that I did like and things that I did find interesting. But overall, I probably not.
All right. Jen?
Yes, I loved it. Despite my problems with it, I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah. Traci, any come to any new thoughts or ideas about the book in this scintillating discussion?
I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. I liked it, but I will say this. I am mostly a reader of literary novels and science fiction, and it bugs me a lot when some literary novelists try to write science fiction and think they've come up with this crazy new thing. And it's like, you haven't been reading science fiction for the last 60 years because, Robert Heinlein did that in 1958. And I don't read crime fiction or mysteries enough to feel that way about this, but I kind of get that idea. It's kind of like a literary novelist doing kind of a murder mystery thing. And I don't know if it was very satisfying in either direction for me. But I think as just generally, it was very readable. I agree it was way too long. But yeah, I thought it was all right.
That's interesting. I think that the true crime angle, she's very clearly a true crime person. She knows a lot about all of it. So that might be why I liked it so much. Because the mystery was fine.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. And I mean, I knew that Denny Block didn't kill her a long time before that was revealed. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah. Well, what else did we like? Let's have a couple recommendations. Alex Mattingly?
Sure. So one thing I did like about this novel was that I thought it was pretty effective at writing about the way that we are kind of snagged on the internet. Like it's not real life, but it intersects and affects real life, and it can be completely overwhelming, even though in theory you should just be able to turn it off and walk away. And a book that I thought handled that same kind of idea really well, but was more of a comedy, Lee Stein's Self-Care, which is about two young women who have a startup that's for it's like a wellness app, I think. And then one of them posts something stupid online and gets canceled, and it's kind of them dealing with the fallout of that. It's probably the last book that I read in a day because it was just very funny and charming and interesting. And again, it kind of handled that whole how as a human being do you actually deal with what the internet is in today's world. I thought it handled it really well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Lee Stein.
The book is Self-Care.
Yeah, awesome. Jen Bingham, what do you got?
I have a podcast recommendation.
That's
instead
legal.
Of a book. It's called The Coldest Case in Laramie. It is a true...
I've listened to it.
It's so good. The themes of memory, and it's actually kind of a better version of this because the way this person is remembered isn't at all what people think. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Great recommendation. I agree with that. That's Serial.
Yeah. One of the few serial series.
Yeah. Awesome. Traci, what do you got?
Did you know that Stephen Wright, the comic, wrote a novel?
I did not, but do tell.
Yes. I'm reading it now. It's called Harold. I will admit, nothing happens. I have no idea what the plot of this novel is, and I'm 60% in. But it's about a precocious 7-year-old having a very rich fantasy life, annoying the shit out of his teacher, and asking a lot of insightful but absurd questions. It's so fun, and it has made me laugh out loud.
Wow. Stephen Wright.
Stephen Wright.
Wow. Great.
I'm 100% sure this is a book about Stephen Wright, by the way.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. Well, so earlier in the show, I mentioned The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. That is my favorite boarding school novel. I just can't recommend it highly enough. But I have already recommended that on a previous show. So even though I just did that, I'm not going to do that again. But seriously, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is worth a couple hours of your time. It's about that long, and it will make you love Muriel Spark for the rest of your life. But I'm going to recommend another very different boarding school novel, Kazuo Ishiguro's 2005 novel, Never Let Me Go. It is science fiction for people who think they don't like science fiction. Tracy? It is really beautiful and sad, and there is a deep mystery at the heart of the story that I will not spoil. In fact, you can't say a lot about it without spoiling it. Never Let Me Go was adapted to a pretty well-received film starring Carey Mulligan, screenplay by Alex Garland, so there's some interesting people involved there. I haven't seen it. And I have also never seen the film version of Remains of the Day. Has anyone ever seen that? Oh, it's probably really good. That's also a great book that doesn't have anything to do with boarding school. But anyway, Never Let Me Go is my kind of science fiction. Might be yours, Tracy. And that, Jen?
I hated that book passionately.
Yeah? Okay.
But I thought about it for months and months and months, if not years afterwards. So I was like, I guess it was really, really good because it made quite I think a lot because it turns the boarding school thing on its head. It's very, without saying much, it's a very anti-romantic take on it. And that maybe that's why I don't like it, because I do have a romantic ideal of that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we can have a debate about that sometime. Tracy, if you wanted to read it, if you guys wanted to read it, we could do a show on that. Okay, Florence. Well, that's it for us. You can find notes for this and all of our shows at the Radio Free Book Club blog on medium.com. Please consider following us. Drop us a note on Facebook. Stream the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show is produced by our friend Oreo Jones for 99.1 WQRT LP in Indianapolis. For Traci Cumbay, Jen Bingham, Alex Mattingly, and all the members of Radio Free Book Club, I'm Ken Honeywell. Thanks for listening. And join us next month when we'll join a band of radical Kiwi gardeners in Eleanor Catton's Burnham Wood. Until then, read a book.